Hello, everyone. This is Al Fadi, and I want to thank you, of course, for joining us today, yet in another episode of this series. I hope you're enjoying it. You can see that the main theme so far is that we're putting the spotlight on the history of Islam, early history of Islam, standard Islamic narrative, its sources, its dating, and the list can go on and on and on. What are we trying to prove? We're trying to show that everything we know about Islam, if we were to rely on these sources, comes at a later time. There is a big gap between the life of the man, Muhammad, and the history of Islam and everything that has to do with his own sayings, his revelations, and so on and so forth. This is why it is extremely important for those of you, especially our Muslim friends, to please don't attack us. Just go and investigate the data that we are presenting to you. Ask yourself this question. Would you, hypothetically speaking, follow a religion? Let's say you're not a Muslim today. Follow a religion that you discover that everything that is known about it is actually put together and packaged together at least between 100 to 200 years after its alleged origin. And ask yourself this question. Would you feel comfortable following something like that? Do you feel that you have a solid foundation to stand on? And are you able also to share the same dating problem and sources problem with others whom you are trying to invite to follow the same faith that you have fallen in love with, even though it has a lot of problems when it comes to its standard narrative? Where today we are going to continue with this discussion, technically speaking, but we called this episode the absence of evidence for a reason. And with me here to unpack that is our dear brother, Dr. Jay Smith. Dr. Jay, welcome back. We specifically chose this title for a purpose, the absence of evidence. If you want to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Now, this came from a debate I had back in 1995 at Cambridge University, Trinity College, with Dr. Jamal Badawi. I had been down at Speaker's Corner earlier in 1993, 1994, introducing what Gerald Hotting was teaching us in his class. I talked about Dr. Gerald Hotting at School of Oriental and African Studies and all of the Muslims that left the class within 2 weeks. I was excited by this fact because it showed me that this was a real problem for the Muslim students. These were Muslim students. These were academic students. These were quite intelligent, quite intellectual, and they were all slamming the door as they left because they were having a crisis of faith. Every one of them was going through a crisis of faith, looking at these really simple references, such as the fact that there was no Qibla that was facing Mecca as early until around, in this case, we now know 727. Muhammad died in 632. The Qiblas don't begin to face Mecca for over almost 100 years later. And all the Qiblas, and I didn't even know this in 1995 because we didn't know this, that Gibson hadn't done his research yet, or he hadn't published his research yet. We were going what Dr. Patricia Corona had found, and she noticed that they were all pointing further north, but she didn't know where. Most scholars in 1995, when I was taking this course, believed it was Jerusalem at that time. Huge problem. If all the Qiblas are facing Jerusalem, we now know it was Petra, more like it was Petra because of Gibson's research, which is just about 100 miles away, so roughly in the same area, but that's 600 miles further north. If all the Qiblas for all the mosques up until 706, every one of them are uniquely facing this position over 106 or 600 miles further north, that is a huge problem. And I remember bringing this up into this debate, and Jamal Badawi turned to me and says, Mr. Smith, the absence of evidence doesn't prove the evidence of absence. And I was kind of caught flat-footed at that time. That's true. I said, it's screaming for evidence, though. The fact that there's absence, they're screaming for evidence because this is only 1,400 years ago. We're not talking about 2,000 or 3,400 years with Moses. We're not talking about thousands of years ago. We're just talking about 1,400 years ago. That's not very long. That is very recent. And we're talking about Qiblas. We're talking about place names. We're talking about people. We're talking about events which had been written down. At that time, we even introduced Mecca because we said, what about the city Mecca? Patricia Crone had found, and by that time, she did her book in 1987, Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam. She had written it, and she had gotten death threats because of writing that book. And all she did was ask this very simple question. there's an absence of any trade route going through a place called Mecca. That was hugely significant.
Which is a logical question to ask.
It's a logical question to ask. And so I was saying, okay, so I don't have the evidence, neither do you. You don't have the evidence either. So in that time, that's all I could throw back at him, because I didn't have any evidence at that period. Well, today, now, we do have evidence. We're going to go through that, and we're going to unpack what the evidence we do have. No longer is there an absence of evidence. There's all kinds of evidence. But it's not the evidence the Muslims are looking for. It's not the evidence the Muslims want to hear. And that's why it's so important that we have this whole series so we can unpack that evidence. Now, here's the question I want to ask you. Should this be a concern for every historian, not just Muslims, but also Western historians? This whole problem that there's an absence of evidence?
It should. And
Why?
I tell you why, from my perspective. If you are just, let's say, a Western historian, maybe in the field of academia, how can you substantiate anything about Islam if you don't have evidence, solid evidence to back up these datings, for instance? How can you discuss something about the life of Muhammad, for instance, or talk about the history of this religion called Islam, or even Mecca, without backing it up with something tangible?
Okay, I'll play the devil's advocate. I'm going to be a Muslim right now. My name is Abdul, and I come to you, Al-Fadi, and I say, well, listen, we've got Ibn Hisham. He talks about the history of Muhammad, gives his life. We have Al-Bukhari, gives us his direct sayings. There it is. I've given you the evidence now. Ibn Hisham, Al-Bukhari.
Well, that's interesting, because I just stated to you that there is a big gap between Ibn Hisham and the life of Muhammad, the physical life of Muhammad, Bukhari and the physical life of Muhammad, Tabari and the physical life of Muhammad. So how can you now fill that gap for me with tangible evidence?
Very simple. We know that everything that Bukhari said or wrote down, everything that Ibn Hisham wrote down, all the others, Al-Tabari and the others, they wrote it down because they got the matan that they wrote down, they got from Isnad, from very well-sourced individuals who got it from so-and-so, who got it from so-and-so. And remember, Al-Fadi, this is a whole science that you have never studied. This is an entire science that shows who are the authoritative people from which this has been received. Therefore, since you haven't studied this, you have no right to therefore question it.
Well, I mean, let's pretend I don't know what I'm talking about. Then why does Bukhari have variations of certain sayings? Why do we have different readings of the Quran if everything is really solid when it comes to this isnad?
So forget about the Quran right now. I'm talking about the biography and the sayings of Muhammad. That's pretty simple, because you have different eyewitnesses. You have different witnesses who saw Muhammad do one thing in one day, another thing in another day, and that's just different. You
So
have the same
we're
thing with
relying on
Matthew,
memory.
Mark, Luke, and John. You've got the same thing. Now, your Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not written by eyewitnesses either. They were all put together in the 4th century. Therefore, you are dependent also on the same idea of isnad. It's just you don't admit it. We actually admit it. We're transparent on this.
That's not true, because prove to me that everything we know about the New Testament is based on later dating, 400 years later.
We know that this was all put together by Constantine. Remember at the Council of Nicaea,
Right,
where
we
they
have
had that
evidence to
table, they put
contradict
all
this.
these books on it, and they shook the table, and what was left is the New Testament.
I know that, yeah, absolutely. But we have evidence from historians who are not even Christians that prove certain events, certain dates, and we even have manuscripts to support what they're saying. We have archaeological discoveries.
None of
to
those
support.
manuscripts are original. None of them come from the 1st century, as you claim. None of them come from the first full manuscript does not come to the 4th century, known as the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus. That is 4th century. That's 300 years later. You've got a problem.
We don't have the problem that Islam has, because we have other evidences.
And we're going to get into this.
Way.
We're going to get into this. But we have the original text of Uthman. We have the Topkapi, the Samarkand,
When was
the
it written?
You're going to interrupt me, or you always can you interrupt me?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
this
When,
is,
was it gonna? When was it written?
we're not going to talk about that right now. That's later on. But can you see? But let's get back to this isnad. The fact that these people at this time period, they knew exactly what they were saying. You could trust them because they weren't lying. This is a whole history of Islam, a whole genre of Islam that you don't know what you're talking about. And that's why we can trust it. I can trust it. Why can't you trust it?
I tell you why I won't trust it, because if you study the ilm al-rijal, or the science of men, the chain of narration, you discover that sometimes they are isolated, singled out as liars, for instance. Or others says that I do not trust this guy in a chain of narration because he had this history of doing this or fabricating things. And so now we have a problem. And here's the
We call that
important.
taif and we throw that to a side. We don't call Bukhari or Sahih Muslim Taif, they are Sahih. Therefore, we trust them. Therefore, I would tell you to go to Bukhari and Sahih
And
Muslim.
why would Bukhari collect 660,000 hadith, throw most of them out, settle with 7,000 that has replication in there or
Proof
duplicates?
in the pudding. He threw out that which was Taif, that
How
which
did he
was
know?
How did he know? Because he knew exactly who his isnad were.
So
but you can see this can continue on back and forth. But let me just.
But I tell you why, though, I'm asking these questions. That's the point I want to bring. You are relying on mere men and claiming that they're inspired to
I'm
share the
relying on
truth,
oral tradition.
which is inspiration, right?
No, obviously these are not inspired, and this is a huge point. And what you're bringing up, you've just hammered me, and I can see I cannot. You can see anybody watching this knows who's winning this debate. You're winning this debate hands down because every not just Islam. We demand this of every religion or any historical reference point. Anybody that makes a historical claim. I don't care if they're religious or not or political or anything else. If they make a historical claim, we would want to know what the reference is or who wrote it down and when was it written down by that person. And we would demand that there be eyewitness account. We do not trust oral tradition for one very good reason. You've been into these birthday parties where you tell a child this thing, and they tell to the next child, next child, next child. By the time 15 children later, what the 15th child said and the first child said are two different things.
That's right.
We call it Chinese whispers or telephone, whatever one you want to use it. And if that can happen in a period of 15 minutes, how it changes, can you imagine what happens over 200 to 300 years?
Absolutely.
200 to 300 years of oral tradition based on somebody that you highly respect and somebody you want to give authority to. I do not trust that type of oral tradition. And that's why we're asking this question. Now, speaking to Muslims now, and I want to talk to you Muslims. Wouldn't you Muslims want to know what exactly happened in the 7th century? Wouldn't you really want to go back to the time Muhammad lived, to the place Muhammad lived? Wouldn't you really like to go back there? Because we're going to show you in the next episode where these people who you trust as the authority for everything you know Muhammad did and said, we're going to show you where they lived. We're going to show you exactly who they were, who Bukhari was, where he lived, where Al-Tabari lived, where Ibn Hisham lived. You need to know this because you haven't been told this, and you're going to see this is going to be highly disturbing.
With that in mind, and thank you, of course, for this mock debate that we did, and it's necessary, really, for people to hear
Now, I got hammered
both
on this
sides
one,
of the
I'm afraid.
arguments. Speaking of the chain of narration, what is the next episode that ties to this?
We're going to actually ask and see where these people lived. We want to find out this authority, all these authorities that Muslims have blindly given their allegiance to.
Right.
Should they be giving their allegiance to these people if they didn't even live in the same place Muhammad lived?
Which I did for most of my life. I gave allegiance to them and even credence to these sources. Hopefully everyone who's watching this is enjoying this series. Hopefully it's been beneficial to you. But come back again, because next time we'll even continue to unpack this about these sources. Until then, have a blessed day. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel Sira International and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.